What happens when the simplest act of kindness is mistaken for the cruelest crime? When standing up for a stranger makes you a suspect? Is it possible to do everything right, and still find yourself utterly and tragically alone? Beneath the sprawling, ancient baobab tree that guarded the small, dust-red village of Amora, a life-altering choice was made. The sun-drenched silence was broken by a desperate, hurried whisper, linking a world of unimaginable wealth to one of heartbreaking poverty. A lifetime of humble dignity was about to be shattered, replaced by the crushing weight of public accusation. A secret of grave importance was held not by the powerful, but by a child, and its keeping could cost him everything, including his very freedom. This isn't just a story about a theft. It's a story about the true, unshakable value of a good name, and the distance between what the world sees and what the heart knows. Before his name became synonymous with scandal and betrayal, there was Michael. A son. A helper. A boy who simply loved his village. Welcome to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. Now, before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Is it the quiet morning in Accra, a busy afternoon in Johannesburg, or a cold evening in Toronto? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now, lean in. Because sometimes, the hero of the story is the one everyone believes to be the villain. The dry earth of Amora village knew the rhythm of Michael's footsteps better than his own mother did. Every morning, long before the sun's first fierce ray, the 11-year-old would walk the winding path leading to the edge of the sprawling, modern estate that had recently sprung up like an alien flower on their ancestral land. It was the estate of Mr. Kenneth, a man rumored to be one of Africa's newest, most reclusive billionaires, a man who had left the village a poor boy 30 years ago and returned a king. Michael didn't go for the gates, he went to the fence line, where a small stream, ignored by Mr. Kenneth's security walls, still flowed clear. He went to collect a special clay his grandmother used for her traditional pottery, the only thing they had left to sell. Michael was a quiet boy, more observant than talkative, carrying the silent weight of his family's struggles like an extra load in his water bucket. He carried himself with the intense, focused seriousness that poverty often forced onto young shoulders, and innocence prematurely aged by responsibility. Yet, a deep well of kindness resided in him, a quality that set him apart in a village increasingly divided between those who worked for the billionaire and those who simply watched him from afar. The billionaire's estate, with its high concrete walls, electric fences, and vigilant guards, stood as a constant, glittering testament to the inequality in Amora. The village people respected Mr. Kenneth's success, but his sudden, isolated arrival had brought an unsettling coldness, a severance of community ties. Michael's mother had warned him to stay away, to never even look too long at the walls, fearing the shadow of such wealth. But one morning, as Michael was digging his clay near the fence, he didn't just see the wall, he saw a breach. A section of the thick, manicured hedge was violently flattened, and a small, distinct glint of gold caught his eye. It was too close to the main road, too obvious to be a discarded trinket. His heart, usually steady, began to thump an urgent rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't just a glint, he realized, it was a man's golden signet ring, heavy and intricately detailed with the crest of a lion. Michael knew this ring. Every single person in Amora knew this ring. It was the one Mr. Kenneth, the billionaire, wore on his right hand, a legendary symbol of his rise from nothing. Michael's first, pure instinct was to call out, to alert the nearest guard. But then, an even stranger discovery stopped him cold. Lying half-hidden beneath the flattened hedge, almost obscured by a discarded piece of burlap, was not an item of value, but a person. It was a man, dressed in the dark, heavy security uniform of the estate guards, unconscious and bleeding faintly from a cut above his brow. The ring lay just inches from his hand. The silence of the morning pressed in on Michael, demanding a choice. To call the guards would be to risk being blamed for the situation, to invite the scrutiny of the powerful estate. His mother's voice, full of fear and caution, echoed in his mind, Don't draw attention, Michael. Nothing good comes from the attention of the very rich. But the man was hurt, desperately so, and the gold ring was the key. To leave it was to leave a piece of evidence that could save, or condemn, the injured guard. Michael's eyes darted from the unconscious man to the ring, then to the imposing, silent mansion beyond the walls. He didn't understand the full truth, but he understood the sight of blood and the necessity of immediate, quiet action. The man wasn't just unconscious, his breathing was shallow, labored. Michael, with a sudden, decisive surge of adrenaline, scooped up the heavy golden ring. The cold metal felt like a hot stone in his palm. He looked at the injured guard one last time, whispered a hasty prayer, and then, gripping the ring tightly, he turned and ran. He ran not toward the village center, where the noise would draw unwanted eyes, but deeper into the forest, toward the ancient, secluded shrine known only to a few elders, a place where secrets were kept by the shadows. He ran not as a thief fleeing a crime, but as a terrified witness carrying a sacred, dangerous burden. He knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the simple act of taking that ring had just shifted the entire course of his life, and that the quiet of his village was about to erupt into a storm of suspicion. The very next morning, the storm arrived. Michael watched from the doorway of his small family hut as a black, gleaming convoy of luxury cars, followed by 2 police pickups, rode into the village square, kicking up red dust that coated everything in a veil of panic. Mr. Kenneth himself, the billionaire, emerged from the largest vehicle. He was not the calm, aloof man of the rumors, he was a cold viper, his face contorted in a terrifying mask of rage, his missing signet ring an invisible, palpable hole in the air. The police quickly cordoned off the area around the estate and began a ruthless, aggressive interrogation of every person who lived within a kilometer of the wall. Whispers of a high-value theft, a betrayal from within the village, spread faster than the harmattan wind. Michael, sitting quietly beside his grandmother, felt the small, heavy weight of the ring pressing against his chest, tied in a piece of cloth and hidden beneath his tunic, a secret that felt heavier than the whole world. The tension became unbearable when the unconscious guard was found, not at the fence, but a mile away, dumped near the river. His head injury was severe, but he was alive. The guards and the police instantly concluded it was a botched robbery attempt, an inside job. The golden ring, they declared loudly, was the motive. The pressure grew relentless, fueled by Mr. Kenneth's fury and the promise of a huge reward for information. People who had been neighbors for decades began to eye each other with suspicion. It was during this frenzy that a small boy, attempting to earn favor and the reward, came forward with a story. He claimed he had seen Michael near the fence line on the morning of the incident, digging for his grandmother's clay, but looking shifty. It was a tiny, insignificant detail, yet in the absence of a better suspect, it was a spark to the dry tinder of the village's fear. Within hours, the police were at Michael's hut. The sheer terror in his mother's eyes was more painful than any interrogation. Michael, holding on to the truth he couldn't share, stayed silent as they searched. The ring was not found. But the boy's refusal to answer questions, his protective silence, was taken as a clear sign of guilt. They dragged him away, a terrified, bewildered boy walking with the dignity of a man wrongly accused, past the faces of the villagers who had watched him grow up. He was taken to a makeshift holding area at the estate, right beneath the shadow of Mr. Kenneth's massive house. The billionaire himself stood before Michael, towering, immaculate, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Tell me where you hid my ring, boy," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "The one with my family's lion crest. Tell me now, and I will spare you the full weight of the law." Michael looked up at the man who had everything, the man whose wealth had blinded him to the truth. "I did not steal your ring, sir," Michael said, his voice a steady, small challenge. "I took it to keep it safe." The statement earned him a vicious laugh from the billionaire. "Safe? From whom?" "Yourself. You will not leave this room until you confess." What Mr. Kenneth didn't know was that Michael had a reason for his silence and for his desperate act. That day, when he picked up the ring, he saw something else, a small, almost invisible piece of white cloth tied around the injured guard's wrist. It was a traditional protective charm, not a bracelet, and it meant the guard was from a village far away, an outsider, and not one of Amora's own. More importantly, as he checked the guard's pulse, he heard a faint, gurgling sound. The guard was choking on his own blood. Michael quickly and instinctively tilted the man's head, clearing his airway, a small, life-saving act learned from an old village healer. He knew the guard was not the thief, but the victim. But to reveal this truth, to explain, he only took the ring to plant it back with the injured guard later as evidence that someone had tried to frame him, would be to admit he saw the guard first, which would instantly make him the prime suspect. As Michael sat alone in the stark, concrete room, the night pressing in with the weight of his fear, he knew the ring was the only piece of leverage he had. The billionaire's relentless focus on the object of the theft had completely obscured the act of the violence. Michael was protecting the truth, protecting the injured guard from being wrongly implicated, and maybe, protecting Mr. Kenneth from a much deeper, more dangerous secret than a stolen ring. He knew a theft of this magnitude was not just about gold, it was about power, and a threat to the billionaire himself. The shame of being called a thief was a heavy stone in his heart, but the realization that he was the only one protecting an innocent man, and perhaps the billionaire's own life, gave him a strange, fierce strength. He resolved to hold the ring, and the truth, until he could speak directly to the injured guard. The storm was not over, it had only just begun to claim its first victim, and Michael wondered how much more he could endure before the truth could finally breathe free. The climax arrived on the third day of Michael's detention. The pressure on the small boy intensified to a breaking point. He was starved, exhausted, but his resolve remained still. News reached the village that the injured guard had finally regained consciousness, but was still too weak to speak. Mr. Kenneth, desperate to recover his family heirloom and close the investigation, stood before Michael one last time, flanked by two formidable police officers. "This is your final chance, Michael," the billionaire stated, his voice now cold, flat, and absolute. "Where is my lion ring? Tell me, and you walk free. Refuse, and you will spend your youth in a place where your name will be forgotten." The officers moved closer, the implied threat more terrifying than any shouted curse. Michael's heart hammered, but his eyes, tired but clear, looked past the billionaire to a framed photograph on the wall, a picture of a young Mr. Kenneth, beaming, standing next to a stern but loving older man. It was the same man who had taught Michael's own grandfather how to hunt, a man whose face was etched into the history of Amora. Michael took a deep breath, and finally, he spoke, not about the ring, but about the guard. "Sir, the man who was hurt, the guard, he was an outsider. He had a white woven cloth on his wrist. The thief is still loose, still close to you." Michael's simple observation cut through the billionaire's certainty like a knife. The small boy had focused on the truth of the victim, while the powerful man had focused only on the loss of the object. Mr. Kenneth stiffened, his eyes narrowing. That white cloth was a detail the police had never reported, a tiny, almost invisible piece of information that only someone who had been close to the victim could have known. And then, Michael delivered the final, crippling blow. "I did not take the ring to steal it. I took it because it was evidence. I was going to give it to the guard when he was safe. Because, sir, the guard was not dumped by the fence. He was dumped by the river, and the person who dumped him had to be someone inside the house." The silence that followed was suffocating. Michael's logic, born of his simple village wisdom, was irrefutable. Only a house insider, who knew the guard's shift changes and escape routes, could have staged a robbery by the fence line, injure a guard, and then move him secretly to the river. Michael's insistence that the guard was an outsider also suggested a motive beyond simple robbery, perhaps a threat to the billionaire's life orchestrated by a rival from the outside. Mr. Kenneth's face went from rage to a horrifying, pale realization. The truth Michael protected wasn't about a ring, it was about a targeted attack. The billionaire immediately called his personal security chief, the one who had been so eager to point the finger at Michael, and demanded to know why the detail about the guard's wrist had been omitted from the report. The chief stammered, his eyes darting, and in that instant, his guilt was laid bare. He hadn't just omitted the information, he was the one who dumped the body to misdirect the investigation, a hired agent of a rival company. The arrest of the security chief was swift and silent, a terrifying show of power that unfolded within the walls Michael had only ever watched from afar. When the dust settled, Mr. Kenneth returned to Michael. He did not apologize with words, but with a deep, humble bow, a gesture that spoke volumes in the cultural language of Amora. "You protected me, Michael, when I was too foolishly focused on a piece of gold to see the poison in my own house," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Michael then reached into his tunic and pulled out the small cloth, untying it to reveal the heavy, gleaming lion ring. He placed it directly into the billionaire's outstretched palm. Mr. Kenneth, looking not at the recovered heirloom but at the boy's open, honest face, felt the shame of his quick, harsh judgment. He had judged a noble heart by the threadbare clothes that covered it. Michael, in turn, had proven that character was the only true wealth. He walked free that afternoon, not as a suspect, but as the quiet, unsung hero of Amora, his name cleared, his dignity restored, and the entire village lining the path to greet him, not with suspicion, but with profound respect. Michael had saved a life, protected the billionaire, and taught his community that the true measure of a man is not the size of his pocket, but the courage of his conscience. Michael never accepted the vast fortune Mr. Kenneth offered him as a reward. Instead, he asked for one thing, a small, clean school built in the village, a place where the children of Amora could learn that knowledge and character were the only things no one could ever steal. 5 years later, Michael, a young man now, worked as a quiet tutor in that very school. The theft of a ring brought ruin and suspicion, but the purity of a young boy's heart brought truth and redemption. The world will always look at your circumstances first, but your heart must always choose to look at the truth. And a heart that chooses courage over comfort, and the preservation of truth over the protection of self, will forever carry the purest, most unbreakable kind of wealth. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs a reminder of courage, and tell me in the comments, what would you choose, a moment of personal safety, or the lifelong dignity of speaking the truth? Subscribe to Stories by the King, where truth heals, and courage finds its home. This is Stories by the King, where love wins, and purpose finds its home.